Okay, so I'm going to put grid so I can see who's here. I will be talking a little bit first, and then we will have some maybe using annotation to ask a few questions. So the idea is to find it and use it. One of the things I will be talking about is something called the monitoring manual that we developed a number of years ago, and I think it can be helpful for many people. Okay, so as I just said, we're going to help you start thinking about why you need data, and I actually will have some interaction there, who might already be collecting it, and whether to monitor yourself, and if so, what, where, and when to monitor, as seeing how much we can fit here. And then we'll be introducing you to some useful resources. So there's the Indiana Water Monitoring Council, if some of you are familiar with that, something called the Indiana Water Monitoring Inventory, and then portals for accessing data, and the monitoring manual. All right, so that's a lot of animation. All right, so we hope that data is a foundation for water resources planning and protection. And I wrote first, we all want to make decisions that are informed by data when possible. And then I wrote, I hope, because of course that's a thing in our nation now. Not everybody wants data, but we hope that you do. But just having data doesn't always lead to anything, right? So I just put an example of some typical data. Here's some turbidity that we were monitoring in some tributary, right? So here's the turbidity goes up and down every day. The stream flow goes up and down. Dissolved oxygen looks something like this. It goes up and down every day, right? So there's just a lot of variety there. And then this was the stream flow. So when the stream flow is highest, dissolved oxygen was lowest. But how do we make that into something we can use, let alone access it? So we want to start with, we're going to use annotation again, just on this screen, of what can it help you accomplish, and what questions can you answer, or what education can it help you do? So this is a very broad question. So again, just try typing like you did before. It looks like we have a large group, 18. I was not expecting quite so many people. So you may be typing over each other because I'm not going to a whiteboard. Think of your own situation or another situation. And just to get juices flowing, this is just a brainstorming. Why do we need water quality data? If you would rather, oops, so this goes through the annotation again. If you would rather, you can type in the chat. I'm going to open the chat. If for some reason you couldn't get annotation going, and I know this happens to people, then go ahead and type in the chat. Then I'll follow both of them. Okay, and hopefully everybody can read this okay. All right, what have we got? All right, so here I can't move them around. That was why I went to whiteboard for the other time, but it was kind of a pain. But let's see if I don't know if you can move them around, but I don't think you can. So if anybody else is typing, type over towards the right. Sorry about that. That's what I found. And I see somebody put a heart there. So this is great. When you see ones that are particularly useful, go ahead and put a heart what's next to it. So we've got show trends to identify issues. We've got, and maybe I won't talk through them all, but do any of you want to explain, say any more about what you've brought in? I know brainstorming with 17 people or 18 people is hard, but if anybody wants to speak out, please go ahead. Okay, it gives us more chance to read this. Isn't this great? It's like when you're in those meetings and you put sticky, you've probably been in where you put dots next to your top choices or something. Have you been in things like that? So let's take the ones with the most hearts. I think the most hearts is down here at targeted education campaigns. I assume that's what they're doing, that data will help us target education. So that's a really interesting thought, not just to see if we've improved the watershed, but actually get education. And of course, helping people monitor is part of the education. At the top, I don't know where my mouse went. Ugh. Sorry. At the top, we've got showing trends. That's one certainly that I think of right away. Looking for relationships among water quality variables. That's really interesting. And looking at cause and effect and source identification. This is a bunch of really great answers. So I'm not going to rush on because this is, this could be the presentation, right? So I'll just talk until I hear somebody else want to talk about these, because these are all great ideas. And you see, you didn't have the same ones to help inform the implementation or the improvement projects, right? Data can certainly help us do that. And then tracking progress of efforts, meeting goals, see what else needs to be done, or if efforts are making a difference. This is terrific. Determine possibilities for projects to help maintain or improve a water body, to bring in stakeholders. That person, I might be interested to hear if that person wants to say how data or how water quality data can help bring in stakeholders. I'd be interested in that. Inform conservation decisions, know what issues need to be addressed in the watershed, and to give us a picture of what the current situation is, baseline and future trends. So that's something like these top ones. Okay, now last chance. Does anybody want to say any more about these before we move on?
As far as bringing in stakeholders, maybe if you have your data shows a large nutrient loss, like in where I'm at, farmers pretty well run the watershed. So if you're seeing a big nutrient loss, you could talk to them about not wasting their money and keeping the nutrients in the system.
Well, that's an interesting one. Yeah, we don't always have enough nutrients that will actually cost them plenty. It costs a lot more in the watershed than it does in their fields, unfortunately, but that is a great idea. We certainly know that economics speak well to the farmer. Any other thoughts before I clear this and move on? All right, I have to clear it or we keep seeing it. And I have to close annotation. All right. Well, hopefully that was fun. So now I want to turn to who monitors water quality in Indiana. Sorry, I was going to animate these, but I didn't. So each slide has two. So IDEM is always monitoring, and their purpose is, what some of you said, that officially it's to determine whether the waters of the state meet the water quality standards. So that's their major reason. They are also keeping track of trends in Indiana's water quality. And another division evaluates whether public drinking water systems meet requirements. My second question for each of these is, can you access the data, right? Could you find it? For IDEM's data, yes, you can. It's not that easy, but you can get it through EPA, available through How's My Waterway. It's a tool we'll learn about next time, or officially through the Ames database. U.S. Geological Survey is a really important agency that monitors our water. They're really at the center. They're the ones who run all the stream flow gauges. And so they don't do as much water quality monitoring. They're very unlikely in your watershed to monitor water quality, but you want to link whatever data you have to a stream flow gauge. But they do have some water quality monitoring as part of this program called I don't know how to pronounce that, and NAQUA. And a wonderful thing with USGS is their data is highly available, very, very easy to find on the web. A simple search will get you to their data, which is not typical of other agencies. There's the Indiana Clean Lakes program. This is run out of Indiana University, and it monitors public lakes. And so that data is also available. So if you have a lake, that's the way to get it. Now I'm going to get into some more, not statewide agencies, but obviously there's a lot of us researchers at universities, and then the USDA Ag Research Service, some of you may be familiar with, it's here in West Lafayette, that is monitoring water. Our purpose is quite different. It's to answer a research question. And a big question that a lot of the monitoring is being used for right now is to assess the effects of conservation practices on water quality. In fact, we're conducting a statewide effort to draw together the monitoring that's occurred for this reason. So it's where we're comparing a field with a conservation practice to one without. Unfortunately, this kind of data is very rarely going to be available to you or to folks in the watershed. But if it's not posted on the web because we're usually using it for publications and for assessment. But if we have a relationship, with my colleagues, there is a possibility that that data could be available. A couple more. I don't know why I did this order here, but the IDNR manages Indiana's fish and wildlife and other resources. So as Sarah said, they're doing a lot of fish monitoring. They also have the Lake and River Enhancement, which some of you may have even benefited from. They have grants, and they also encourage monitoring. So when there are reports done, they store them online. Unfortunately, these have gotten more difficult to find. They used to be fairly easy. Now they're more difficult, but we will make every effort to help people keep getting those reports, because we certainly don't want to lose the monitoring data that's been done.
They did away with that software that we stored it on. The collaborative site is no more. So we have to be asked for those reports for now until we find something else. Sorry.
Oh, thank you, Austin. That's what I've heard. So that's your plan for going forward, that an email to someone like you is the way to get them?
For now, we're trying to make it, well, right now we are trying to make something like the collaborative site with DNR SharePoint, but folks are going to have to log in to get that information.
Oh.
We're still filling the database and trying to figure out the best way to roll it out. We're just working with the best things that we've got right now.
Oh, that's too bad. And Austin, remind me what your job is there. Are you one of the people that manages this?
Yes, I'm the watershed restoration biologist for the Lake and River Enhancement Program. So I work with Rhoda Edgewell, who does mostly aquatic vegetation stuff, and Doug Nussbaum, who does a lot of sediment removal, log jam stuff, and then the construction type projects.
Okay, so great news for us in the Watershed Leadership Academy of 2022 is that we have one of the key people among us. So we have a way to access that, but because certainly if you do want to check, and this will be in, I think it's the R3. I know that we have recognized, or no, it was already in the R1, wasn't it? That's right. We asked people to find reports on their watershed, and we recognized, I guess Sarah knew that it wasn't available on the web, so we gave that already. But thank you, Austin, for being willing to bring that up for people, because it's certainly important. All right, so then we've got local stormwater. I talked about that earlier. Most towns, all towns, and even some rural areas have a stormwater authority or health department, and they may be collecting data. Here, each one is different, so you can't, we can't say anything common about all of them. For example, Marion County Health Department has a huge data set, and they do make it available on the web, and others do as well, but I don't necessarily have that information. So, and then finally, there's watershed groups like many of you are involved in, and soil and water conservation districts. Here again, people are doing very different things. They may be assessing water quality, and their purpose is to just the kinds of things that we just listed, right? The kind of things that you listed there are education. I would assume that most are willing to share the data, but are the data organized well enough that others can understand, right? That's a challenge and something we all need to be working on. And sadly, we're not sure that all are preserved for the future, right? So if people go to a lot of trouble to collect data, we want to make sure that it gets stored not just in a PDF file. That's kind of a problem with the layer stuff too, but it would be good to actually have it in a spreadsheet so that people can really use it. And then as we look at more broadly than that, there's all kinds of voluntary groups and volunteers who may be monitoring. So the Hoosier River Watch has a database. And so that's possibility, but we have the same questions here. They may be willing to share, but are they organized well enough? So I think I'll just talk about the Monitoring Council, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kate. So the question is there someone that's coordinating all these disparate efforts? And there are others. There are more than this. So about 10 years ago, I didn't look up the date, it may be 15 years ago now, many of us got together and started the Indiana Water Monitoring Council. It's completely voluntary. It doesn't have outside funding, but it's formed and managed by committed people who want to coordinate monitoring in Indiana. So there is a website that functions fine, and they've been less active during the pandemic because we're used to having in-person conferences, but they've had a few online conferences. I particularly want to point out the Indiana Water Monitoring Inventory. I didn't open this up beforehand, so let me just open it now. The Indiana Water Monitoring Inventory is something that I was heavily involved with at the beginning. And we called up all these agencies to, find out what's, got spreadsheets of what their monitoring is. Now that was heavy effort about 10 years ago. More recently, it's been moved so that the site still works, because of course, as you can imagine, things have turned over many times since then. The software, as Austin said, for IDNR, right? So the software changes. But this has been updated, but the data sources haven't necessarily been. But for example, for USGS, it's live. So I'm going to click on, I think this must be USGS. So for each of these points, you can find what the data type is. So this is like the real-time water data from USGS. And what it gives you is, if you click on this, it will tell you how to get access to that. Okay, so the water monitoring inventory is really a portal designed to help you find data in a particular location, but it doesn't have the data, because actually having the data there would have been another level of complexity that was beyond us. But I think that for the purpose of what this talk is about, I think that this is a really helpful resource. And at some point, maybe we'll get going on trying to update the actual data. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kate Barrett, who, as I said, I just happened to be talking to yesterday, and she's doing what she called a scavenger hunt for data. So I thought that would be really helpful to hear how that's been going. So Kate, thanks for sharing with us your experiences in this.
Well, thank you, Jane, for that intro. Yeah, so right now, again, Kate Barrett here with the St. Joe River Basin Commission here in South Bend. We're still, so I started with the commission back in June of last year now. And my role has kind of been like, well, we want to start a monitoring program, specifically looking at macroinvertebrates as an index of biotic integrity in the more rural areas of our basin, because we have really good coverage for macro and fish community monitoring in the more urban areas, like especially around Goshen, Elkhart, South Bend, and Mishawaka. But in putting this all together and trying to establish our new monitoring stations, it became apparent, well, what actually is already out there. And so it actually kind of, this whole process of trying to use the commission as like a clearinghouse and act as kind of this collection database and interpreter of data was kind of spurred by my first involvement, or first time going to our board meeting for the commission in June, where I met Maddie Lehman, who's also in this break room. And I did some preliminary analysis of some historic monitoring data. And so she approached me and said, hey, we've in Goshen, we've got a lot of data, and maybe this could be something the commission does to help us out. So been looking at, from there, there's a lot of water quality data in Elkhart County, which is awesome, and long-term data as well with really good resolution. So from there, been analyzing those data, and then also looking at, well, what other data exists in other counties that we serve on both Indiana and Michigan sides of our basin. So finding data can be a challenge. I think, as Jane was showing, sometimes figuring out, okay, where do I actually go to find what data are out there? What's the period of record? Are these recent samples? Is this maybe a one and done type thing where one small tributary was sampled once in 1995? And so kind of working on that right now, trying to do this preliminary analysis of what is the state of our basin in terms of coverage, what types of water monitoring data are out there. And so I think that's useful to see what's out there as a baseline, see what's out there so that you're not, I guess, reinventing the wheel or duplicating efforts. And so this data scavenger hunt that I've been on, and it's actually quite a fun experience. I've been reaching out to like county health departments. Next on my list is wastewater treatment plants and facilities, and just contacts that I know through being at our commission board meetings. And what we want to do, and to kind of link it back to engaging stakeholders, something that came to mind is like using data as this powerful management tool, or to actually use data to make informed decisions about what should be done for a specific watershed or sub watershed. And so what we are working on right now at the commission is actually taking these data, and I'm still collecting more. And what I might do is share my screen because I can't really describe the map without showing it. So if that's okay, Jane, I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, please.
Briefly, if I can find the, I guess I'll just do the whole screen. And what I want to show is, oops, oh shoot. I pressed the wrong thing. I just want my mouse. Sorry, I'm in my you can all see my MakeHog email. Where is my map? Oh, there it is. Here we go. So our whole goal is to create this interactive web map to actually put points on all of the streams for which we have data. I just uploaded data that I received from Michigan. They did a data poll for me, which was awesome. Michigan Eagle database, I believe. So there's all these points representing different water qualities based on macroinvertebrate scores. So green being excellent, blue adequate, and the orange being not so great. And then down here shows the data that I received from Maddie and just kind of the points on Elkhart County's monitoring locations. And soon this will hopefully fit in so that we'll have a nice outline and filled in image of the whole basin. And from there, stakeholders can actually maybe go in and say, hey, what's happening on the Fawn River? Oh, what about this regulated drain? How's this looking? So we're really excited about where this is going. And so I'm happy to talk more about that. But we also I also really want to develop some educational materials too, kind of also in line with what Maddie was saying previously, like targeted education campaigns and such. So that's kind of what we're doing in a nutshell. And it's something that really excites me because I think we can reach a lot of stakeholders and including the public. And especially, I really want to reach like people that are on the margins, like marginalized communities that do have a stake in what we're trying to accomplish. So thank you for listening.
Thanks. And it's a wonderful coincidence. And thanks, Maddie, I guess, for suggesting that. But it's certainly a never-ending task. It's not something that you'll finish, Kate, but it's always good when you start. I'm just going to show another slide and then we'll get to discussion again. I forgot to share this one before. Are you seeing the slide that says Indiana Water Monitoring Inventory? Sorry, somehow my other computer got sent to the other breakout room. So, okay. So, how do we find IDEM data? Well, I just want to say it's at the Indiana Water Quality Atlas. And so I've just been playing around with that some. I don't know if anybody knows background to what extent IDEM keeps that up. This is a resource that they developed probably 10 years ago as a way of sharing their data. So it still works, but I don't know if the data are current. But I'll look at that in a minute. But what I for sure are current are the nationwide portal for water quality data, which is waterqualitydata.us, and that multiple agencies pull in. So it's all EPA's data, and that means it's all the state's data plus USGS. So it was developed 5 to 10 years ago as a central place that you can get this. Now, EPA has a tool called How's My Waterway, which I think we'll hear a little bit about, that sort of makes it simpler to access all that data on a watershed basis. But either one is very good. But I wanted to at least show you the Water Quality Atlas. Here's what I find from it. Okay, so it's I don't know, it's also in one of the Esri products. But so you can, so it has many thousands of data points, just like Kate showed, even kept the same color scheme, but for different reasons. Here they have fish sample stations are blue, chemical sample stations are green. So I clicked on one that has both, and it's not very easy to get to the data. I thought it might come up in these boxes. They have, apparently there's 64 little boxes, but the data are not coming up. So then the other way to do it is to show related records. And so you'll see the records are actually down here at the bottom. So, and this is a typical problem that you click on a point and there's actually only a couple data points. So this is what's very frustrating about looking for data, because it doesn't really help us to have two times that they collected something. So I can't tell you a way to for sure get useful information out of this. But I did want to share that that's IDEM's primary way of oops, sorry. Great. I was going to go back to the PowerPoint without, all right. How did we get here? All right. So this is the problem. Presentations go smoothly when you just keep sharing and not going to websites. So it is always complicated otherwise. Okay, so that's the ways to get some data. And again, you can find out who's monitoring where through the inventory. And all these URLs will be in the presentation that's already linked. But here's where I wanted a discussion then again, and either verbally or in the chat, are there other sources or tips that anyone wants to offer for accessing water quality data? Kate didn't talk a lot about her frustrations. I'm sure there's been a lot of frustrations, but wondering if any of you have suggestions. So again, we want to access the wisdom of the crowd. Maybe some of you know more than I do of good tips that people should do for finding data in their watershed.
I can share from the other end, and just a plug for MS4 data. The reason I approached Kate being that as part of our permit, we were collecting this data for years, but we don't have the expertise to analyze it. And so it's been sitting in PDFs until we were able to get that in the hands of Kate. So MS4 is just a plug for them as being a really good resource.
Okay, PDF is certainly not the friendliest format. Hopefully you maybe had it in another format, but thank you, Maddie, that's really helpful. And again, you can either just speak out, there's not that many, or you can do a virtual hand raise with the reactions tab at the bottom, or just raise your hand or just start speaking. Any other sources that you know of?
I've overall found it very hard to access and find water quality data on various websites. The IDEM one, like you said, it's outdated. It's not super user friendly. A lot of people in the past that wrote past management plans where I'm at, they used like the Indiana Watershed Toolkit. And I think that that's what used to be, or it was called something else, and now it's called Toolkit. So that whatever was used in the past to access a lot of stats is no longer available. So that was hard as we're trying to write a new plan.
It is so hard. So I certainly want to affirm that. And when you say toolkit, I think of two things. They're not sure. One is the IDEM's Watershed Toolkit, which is basically a list of resources. So they would have links to, for example, the Water Quality Atlas. They don't have a specific toolkit. But the other meaning, when people, I'm sure when people hear toolkit, they may be thinking of the NRCS conservation toolkit, which is the NRCS software, but I'm not sure if it would have monitoring data, or if anyone else knows what else comes through toolkit. Okay, Kayla has suggested partnering, that she partners with the local Indian tribe who has ongoing monitoring data. Oh, how interesting. That can't be very common. Where are you located, Kayla? I don't know if you're able to talk.
Yeah, I'm located in Jackson, Michigan.
Okay.
Well, not Jackson, sorry. I came from Jackson. We moved. I live in Homer, which is Calhoun County, and we're working on the Nottawa Creek watershed, and it ties right into the St. Joe's. So I'll definitely be partnering more with Kate and Allie on, getting some of the information that they have on the St. Joe's to, tie into into this management plan that we're working on updating. But the local Indian tribe in Athens, Michigan, they have ongoing water monitoring. They have probes in the water that they have, and they have a website that updates every day with like the oxygen levels and the turbidity and all of that, you know, in their area that they have access points. So we've partnered with them, and we're hoping to get more data from them and be able to, hopefully in the coming months with, you know, hopefully this change of weather that hopefully is going to come, be able to do more outdoors with them and see what kind of information we can get with them.
Okay, it's great to hear about really a non-traditional partner. I don't think there are any tribal communities in Indiana that would be collecting data, so that would be surprising to me, but more in Michigan. But it's certainly great to find out who is there. Okay, Cora has suggested USGS. It has the best historical monitoring of some of Washington County's watersheds. Yes, absolutely. Flow everywhere, and in Washington County, they may have actually done some water quality. So, and the good thing there is it's quite easy to access. Has anyone used the Indiana Water Monitoring Inventory that I showed? I'm afraid that it is a good resource, not a great resource anymore, because we haven't probably kept it up as well as we could, but it's still a very good way to access. So I would recommend that. All right, last call for any more ideas. All right, then we will push on. So the question is, once you've pulled together and seen what there is, then do the existing data allow you to do those wonderful things that you listed early on? Identify problems. Nobody listed estimate loads, but that's often what watershed groups need to do. Evaluate what improvements are required and select appropriate solutions. And I would add, do education and look at trends and all the other things. So if the answer is no, then you want to think, well, what are the data gaps? So be, specific, and is then developing and implementing your own monitoring strategy the best way to get the needed information? Because I may sound kind of negative here, but it's really important that people count the costs before they do monitoring, because inadequate monitoring really doesn't help anything. You spent a lot of time and money, but if there are only a few points, it doesn't really get anywhere on a stream. On a lake, you might be able to get away with a few points. Kate, thank you for nodding, but I think that's right. So because of that, we developed several years ago now a manual called Monitoring Water in Indiana. This is on the web under the same www.purdue.edu/watersheds as the original Academy site is. And so it's been there, and it has several purposes. So, well, overall, it's to provide information to help in developing a monitoring strategy to obtain useful information. And of course, everybody has limited resources. No matter how much resource you have, it's limited. So the emphasis is on developing a monitoring strategy, not a lot of details on conducting the monitoring, because that would be too much for a book. But I want to emphasize that resource here, because obviously in one short presentation, we can't give all the information. So you don't need to be keeping careful track here of the PowerPoint, because all this information is in very clear form, I think, in a PDF document, and that'll be a better way to access it. But our goal is to help more groups move towards useful, coordinated, strategic monitoring in Indiana, because we have such uncoordinated monitoring. We started out creating it for the watershed groups funded by IDEM's Section 319 program, which we have some of in this group. I don't know, raise your, who is anybody a 319 group? I'm trying to think who I think. Billy, maybe, can't think. There are a bunch of people in the academy who have that, but I'm not sure if any of you are theirs. But once we did it, then people pointed out, okay, it'd be useful beyond that. So the stormwater people who are doing some monitoring could use it, health departments, and so maybe you, and you're with a variety of different kinds of groups. Okay, Billy Pig is applying, so you may have something like that soon, and maybe doing some watershed monitoring. So the goal is that if you do monitoring, that it results in useful information. So you start with your watershed goals, your project needs, those driving forces, again, that we talked about. And then the manual can help you move towards a useful monitoring strategy. But don't start with the monitoring strategy. You want to start with how you're going to use it at the end. So that's really our goal here. The first half of the manual talks about what to monitor, and it's a very brief introduction to the different parameters. So I think this is something that's helpful for people who haven't done much monitoring. And face it, all of us are only experts in part of the kinds of things that we monitor, right? I'm very much from the chemical monitoring side. That's what I know, and stream flow. But I don't know the habitat stuff. I don't know the biological stuff. Kate, I'll just use as an example, is an aquatic biologist, so she certainly knows the biologist. So we all sort of know part of it. So we go through each of those. Under chemical, we look at the different forms of nitrogen and the different forms of phosphorus and biological oxygen demand. These were chosen from all the parameters that could be included by a stakeholder group. What else? You get people together. So we got people from that do monitoring from all over the state together to say what are the most important things to monitor if a watershed group can only monitor a few things. So this is the list. I think that this fact that there are 4 forms of nitrogen is confusing to many people, and we'll come back to explaining that. So under physical, these are the ones on the list. And this is, again, where we provide information, but this is also held up that this group of stakeholders across Indiana said these are the most important parameters to monitor. And biological, there's the index of biotic integrity for fish communities. That's for the limited number of people who can monitor fish. It requires an electrofisher and a license. So don't think that anybody can just start doing that. The macroinvertebrate indices of biotic integrity is what volunteers or anyone can do. So the Riverwatch volunteers are doing the macroinvertebrates because it's much more possible for groups. Also, chlorophyll A is getting monitored more as we have terrible algae issues. And E. coli has always been monitored because this is what determines whether something is swimmable. So anybody who has a beach certainly is very aware of this. Okay, so I'm just going to go through one parameter as an example, and that's the nitrogen, the forms of nitrogen. And again, these are available for all the others, but just to say what we include, and you'll learn something about nitrogen. And I think I'll just go through the whole thing. So first of all, it's what is it used for? What is nitrogen? Why do we care about it? So nitrogen in the water can lead to eutrophication. It's not as important in our lakes as phosphorus is, but it is linked to it. And especially it's been identified as the major cause of hypoxia or low oxygen in the Gulf of Mexico. So we here in Indiana are major contributors, unfortunately, to the hypoxia in the Gulf of Mexico due to nitrogen, various forms of nitrogen that go down the Wabash, the way into the Wabash and into the Ohio River and then into the Mississippi and down to the Gulf of Mexico. So we're very much at the national level, we're very much, people are hoping that we can reduce our nitrogen. There's also the fact that in drinking water over 10 milligrams per liter, it causes health effects. We very rarely have this in surface water. So this is more of a groundwater issue. So that one doesn't get a lot of people on board because our levels are usually around 3, 4, something like that in the rivers, but they can be higher in streams. Okay, so another thing we do is explain the 4 forms of nitrogen in water. Because if you haven't monitored this, I think it's very confusing, right? So there's nitrate, ammonia, and organic nitrogen, and together they make something called total nitrogen. So when you send things to a lab, or if you're able to do this yourself, it is really important what kind of nitrogen you're measuring. So I think this is a frustration to some, but you just have to learn it. Nitrate is the most common by far, not by a little. It's like 10 times more than any other form. Nitrite is very uncommon, and the primary ammonia is toxic. So this is what wastewater treatment plants historically worry about because even in low quantities, it's toxic to fish. But at the larger level, it doesn't matter as much. There's much less of it. And then organic nitrogen is what comes with erosion. Okay, the most common monitoring is either total Kjeldahl nitrogen. This is a funny name, but I think it's Norwegian ancestry, which is my ancestry. So I know we'd probably say Kjeldal, but Kjeldal is ammonia and organic nitrogen. And then the other form is a lab analyzes for nitrate and nitrite together. So you'll usually get a value for nitrate and nitrite. This is very confusing, but you can assume that almost all of it is nitrate. So we often just call it nitrate because there's so little nitrite. See, so these are the kind of things that, it's like, do you have to learn all this? Well, somebody has to make a monitoring strategy that makes sense. Not everybody needs to, but it's important that somebody understand it. So if we take just nitrate as an indicator, this is the largest form in Indiana by far. 70% of total nitrogen is nitrate that we looked at through many different sources. Okay, and I just said that. If there is a little nitrate, it gets converted to nitrate, and that's why we can just assume that it's all nitrate. So then we have a table in this monitoring manual for each parameter of the major agencies. So the IDEM Watershed Assessment Planning Branch, who you'll hear from in a future workshop, LAIR, who Austin works for, the USGS National Water Quality Assessment Program, the Indiana Clean Lakes Program, and Hoosier River Watch. This is the volunteer program. And at that time, we collected the methods for each of these because that hadn't been available in one place. So I think that these are still current. The only one I know that updates them is IDEM. They do update this regularly. So the one that we have is updated. So Austin, I'm not sure if IDNR has updated their manual here. I think Rod knows about this, and we hope that we do, not that people are looking at it regularly. But we also have a list then of common analysis methods. Again, this seems so esoteric when you first think about it, but once you are doing it, you realize that this is really important because your lab is going to say what method they're using. All should give the same results, but they don't necessarily, and it's really important to report the methods. So we provide information on that. Then we provide information on what it means, right? Who cares about nitrate? So there's eutrophication, there's the hypoxia, and this is particularly a concern in areas with high percentage of tile drained agricultural land. So the whole northern half of Indiana and the Southwest, this is the area that I work in. I work primarily in drainage because there is such a high contribution of nitrate from those tile drained watersheds. So method overview, it's not really very interesting here, but when you look at the fish or the macroinvertebrates, it is, so we just say for nitrate, usually people are taking a grab sample and then you can go to a lab. There's some continuous nitrate monitoring. It's the equipment is still about $20,000. I haven't priced it lately, but I think it's still very expensive. So it's available, but very few organizations have it. And then we try and provide typical levels in Indiana, because any of you who are doing this, Kate, I'm sure you are struggling with what's a good level and what's a bad level, right? So one of the ways to look at it is what's found recently. So somebody did an analysis of all the IDEM data from 1990 to 2010. And you can see these are large numbers of samples, 5,000, 14,000 samples. And they found what the median level is in these various areas. And so this gives you an idea that if your level is 5 or 10, it's quite high compared with what Indiana has in general. So there's that kind of a thing. Oh, and these are the ecoregions. You may or may not have ever encountered them, but EPA, in looking for nutrient standards, is using these ecoregions. So this is a universally accepted method, other than watersheds, of dividing our state into a number of ecoregions. So 55 is the biggest. It's called the Eastern Corn Belt Plains. 54 up in Northwest is the Central Corn Belt Plains, and 56 is Southern Michigan, Northern Indiana Drift Plains. Okay, so the other, so that's, we provide that for all the parameters. So I think if you're, it is a lot to know. I just want to, again, in counting the costs, there's the cost of monitoring, but there's also the cost in your time of learning about it. And I think it doesn't make sense to do your own monitoring unless you have some idea of what that means. So that's what I want to encourage people to study, or to work with a consultant who can help you do it well. A few other considerations are that in a stream, the other thing that makes it really difficult, besides the different lab analyses, et cetera, is that there's so much difference day by day and seasonally in a stream. So this is nitrate. Oh, sorry, the axis isn't labeled here, but this is nitrate in milligrams per liter in just a typical Indiana agricultural watershed. It's one here near West Lafayette. So in the spring and summer, it was up over 10, and here it's even higher. But then in the summer and fall, it's very low. So if you take samples just any one of these times, you won't get anything that's representative at all, right? It becomes low in the summer and fall, especially because the tile drains aren't flowing. So that's why you'll get such very different measurements. Now, lakes are different. Lakes, you can monitor if you happen to be on a lake, but there aren't that many of us. You can monitor a few times and get a reasonable result. So out of that, the EPA has proposed nutrient criteria. This is kind of old. They never got anywhere. They proposed them. The states, Indiana and other states, kind of shot them down. So these are not official water quality standards. They stopped at being proposed, and I'm not even sure they're still on the books. So these fairly low levels were what was proposed, but they're not actually in force. But you can think of them as targets or protective levels. If you're wondering, again, what's a good nitrate level, these were the numbers that were suggested as something you could be shooting for. There are other criteria that other states have used. Ohio suggested 1 milligrams per liter. The IDEM draft TMDL target was 10 milligrams per liter. So really with nitrate, we don't know. And I think this is the final one. Finally, if you want to start monitoring nitrate, what do you need? Well, you need equipment for field sampling, and you need the laboratory analysis somehow. So you would need some kind of equipment, you'd need some kind of time, you'd need some kind of expertise. Taking a nitrate sample doesn't really require any expertise, but if this were macroinvertebrates, then you do need expertise. And the costs are, at different levels. The important thing here is that laboratories typically charge $10 to $40 per sample. So we were trying to help people have an idea of budgeting for a monitoring program, because I think, again, people start off without being able to develop a careful budget and just start doing it. So we provide the same information for 25 other parameters. I think I'm going to stop for a minute here and ask people to, because this is a pretty complete list, use annotation again and put down with some kind of a stamp next to any that you have monitored. Okay, that's pretty cool. I actually really like seeing these pop up, and nice that you didn't all use the same stamp. So that's great. The ones I see a lot, okay, a lot of people are doing total nitrogen and ammonia. Interesting, because that one's not that easy. Nobody doing bank erosion hazard index, that's reasonable. It hasn't really caught on. The flashiness index is one about stream flow sampling. Somebody is a fish sampler here. Does that person want to speak out? I don't know who actually is known for fish sampling.
I have, when I worked in Muncie at the Bureau of Water Quality, I helped out with their fish sampling, and I also was an intern for IDEM for one summer.
Okay, fantastic. So you've done that, and I think it looks like a lot of fun. I've just watched it being done, and it's kind of sad when all the fish float to the surface, but they seem to recover. And it's really interesting.
Fun. it's neat to get to identify all the different fish, from big fish to little darters and everything. It's really neat.
So
It
when I
is-
was,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. So when I was in college, I spent 3 summers. We worked on the in Wabash County. So we sampled all of our streams there. And then I also sampled from almost Fort Wayne clear down to Logansport on the Eel River. So I've sampled spent a few summers sampling.
Fantastic. And was that mainly biological sampling?
Yeah, we did habitat scores as well as IBI scores.
Okay, yeah. So that is what
That was quick.
IDEM and Hoosier River Watch tends to focus on. So that's great. But just to know that there are other types of monitoring as well. But this is really nice to see what you folks have done. And I guess I in the few minutes remaining before I go on, I'm just going to ask if there's anything that somebody wants to share. Otherwise, I'll finish the rest of my slides, but I'm happy to not also if somebody wants to share some thoughts on this about, again, ideas that they have or struggles that they've had or ideas for others.
I have a thought. One thing that has actually, someone mentioned Dara Deegan, who does all the fish sampling in Elkhart County. One thing we're struggling with is with the fish indexes of biotic integrity is the metrics. I believe it's the IDEM or Ohio method. I forget which one, but doesn't really work well for cold water streams or cool water streams, which are actually more common in our area of the state. So we have some cool water streams and our indexes maybe aren't working as well. So there might be a need to actually revamp and modify existing metrics for biotic integrity to inform on water quality trends.
Okay, those are the complexities that it's good. We need aquatic biologists actually looking into this. Thanks. All right. Oops, I have to stop annotating. Okay, so and this says that we have 8 minutes left, but I want to go back by 12:10, so we only have 5 minutes left. So just say, so the second part of the manual, all that was in the first part, like about monitoring each thing. But this one is sort of how you plan a strategy. So first of all, there's selecting sites. And I really strongly say that don't try to monitor too many sites, because getting a good temporal representation at a few sites is more useful than a few measurements at many sites. So forget if I have, okay, I took out the exercise here. We're going to put where we thought we'd sample. But anyway, it's up for grabs. Not everybody agrees with me, but that's what I find. Just because if you have a couple data points, you don't know what to do with that. It's very hard to know. If there is a USGS flow gauge, select that site, monitor right there. There's no good reason not to monitor as closely as you can, because that will really help in interpreting it. And unless it's particularly inaccessible, but I don't know why it would be, because why would USGS monitor there if it was inaccessible? So really strongly encourage people to do that. So before you start monitoring, check if there are any flow gauges and make sure those sites are among the ones. There are advantages to monitoring large or small watersheds. Small watersheds are better to see change, but large watersheds give you a better idea over your whole watershed. So it depends on your goal in monitoring. Again, yeah. So if you want to see the effectiveness, if you want to make some changes and see if the changes actually show up in the water quality, then you want to show very small watersheds and also paired sites so that you can actually see a change. It's not easy. When you're monitoring, I would just urge everybody to follow established protocols. You who have interned with IDEM, I'm sure you know that well. You don't just make up a way to monitor. You don't wing it, right? You have to follow the protocols, and everybody should be doing that. Hoosier River Watch has protocols. They're simpler, but they are following protocols. Because if you don't follow an established method, then the data really aren't meaningful, right? So then you've just got a bunch of things you monitored, but people can't work with. So you you really want to follow the protocols used by agencies. And the resource, and this is what I showed you from before, is this catalog of monitoring protocols used by Indiana agencies. So that would be a way to find out how the agencies do it and hope to join them. Now, one thing I'll add here, this reminds me, I forgot to look into it, but the White River Alliance has started a big volunteer monitoring training program called RAFT. I don't know if anybody has been involved in that. I was going to go through the training and see what they do, but then I didn't do that. Does anybody have experience? They just started it last year. Okay, interesting. We have people from the north and people from the south, but I guess we don't have a lot of Indianapolis people here, but they are getting it going. But they have very established protocols that they're working from. Once again, especially with things like turbidity, flow, change is very important. So this is samples collected every 15 minutes for 6 hours, right? So just visually, you can see that if you took a sample here, you'd say, wow, this water is great. If you took your sample here, you'd say this water is horrible. But all this happened within 6 hours. So you really have to capture the variability to make sense of it. And that's why SONS or automatic measurements are so useful for things like turbidity. And it's really hard to get a sense of that without it, because otherwise you just won't be representative. And here's some other things. Turbidity, here's biological oxygen demand. It goes up and down every day. So one measurement by itself, really not that useful. People measure it, but I think it's really hard to make sense of it. We give some information on working with a lab. I'm not going to try and go through this, but just to say it's here in the monitoring manual. So in summary, and then we're going to go back to the main group. Hopefully they're ready for us. Yeah, well, they'll just have to be. Water monitoring is expensive and it's a major undertaking, but obviously there are good reasons to do it if the data that you need are not available. But we talked a lot about trying to find data that are available. You want to plan carefully so that when you do all these efforts, you'll have data in the end that are usable and useful. And this monitoring manual can help, and there is a link to it. So we talked about finding data, the data scavenger hunt, as Kate said, and then putting it together. And then if you can't find data in your watershed, starting to do it yourself. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we go back to the main room? So maybe I can breakout rooms. I think I can close it. I am going to close the rooms.
Okay, well, thank you all again. If you have other